What's up with this internet shit? Scrapple TV.
When we get down to his house in Rittenhouse Square, we get in there, we figured going there, his nickname was Fast Eddie, you'd make a fast dollar. So we'd have money, and each of us would have enough money to go to the movies and get popcorn, and then afterwards we'd hustle some more pedophiles. When we get there, there's 30 kids in this guy's living room. And he's like a doctor's office.
Mm-hmm. Welcome to the first episode of Off the Deep End here at Scrapple TV. I'm with Greg Bucceroni. So you're a big voice for advocacy for victims of crime in the community. I think you were a former police officer or school officer.
I worked at a couple of different police
involvement.
departments. I worked for Gloucester Township Police. I was a Camden police officer for a little bit. I had done work with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, and I was a police officer in the schools in Philadelphia.
So what we're here to get into is some of your childhood exploits, because it seems like there's been a lot of things that have come into light recently with Sandusky and things like that. As a child, you wound up on the streets, involved in with some organized crime people and things just like riffraff and.
Yeah, the 70s was a adventurous time for me and a troublesome time. My mom and dad had divorced in the early 70s. We didn't have a lot of money. It was me and a bunch of brothers and one sister, and grew up kind of on welfare and struggling, and I was getting in and out of trouble. 1975, I had my first job as an errand boy for South Philly mobster Harry Riccobini, and he gave us a variety of jobs to do for him. Nothing big time, but kid stuff and running errands and numbers and fencing stolen cigarette cartons and all that. Got in trouble. My mom was getting tired of going in and out of family court and to the police station, so she decided to enroll me into this thing called the South Philadelphia Boys Club. And that was a program for troubled boys to rehabilitate us and get us on the straight and narrow. And when I was there, I met two philanthropists. One was by the name of Ed Savitz, and the other one was Sam Rappaport. And that's when the trouble went from normal trouble to crazy trouble.
So for people that don't know, Eddie Savitz was a very wealthy philanthropist in Philadelphia. He ran I guess it was an actuary company or something like that, where they did statistics and things like that. Huge political supporter, very wealthy, Rittenhouse Square, very connected as you can be in this town.
I could talk about Eddie Savitz for decades.
Yeah, we have other stuff to get into too.
But real quickly, Eddie Savitz was his philanthropist. He was supposed to be working with this South Philly Boys Club to work with mentor at-risk boys. And at first it started out with like that, and he took us to Penn State games and Great Adventure and Eagles games and Phillies games, and kind of took us out. Everything was starting to normal. Then he used other kids to come up and kind of talk us to these parties. Now at first I said, well, what kind of parties are these? And they said, oh, you go there, they're going to let you smoke weed, drink, there'll be girls there, we could go skinny dipping, watch some porn. So, girls going to be there? Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I was 12 years old, and, I wasn't experienced with girls, but I did a lot of thinking about it in the bathroom with Penthouse magazines and Playboy magazines, so I wanted to take it to the next level. So I went with these parties, and at first everything started out innocent, and then as the party would go on, you go skinny dipping. And the girls would come in, the other kids. This is after we're watching porn and kind of a little high and buzzed from alcohol and marijuana. And while we're wrestling, they would come into the pool. Eddie Savitz and some of his other philanthropist friends, and they get in the pool and they're horse playing, but we're all naked. And as I'm saying, this kind of I'm feeling weird about a guy naked wrestling with me with his penis up against my butt side or my leg or whatever. And everyone said, oh, it's cool. Hey, no harm. It's all, we're just playing around. And so I kind of let it go, and then I felt weird about it. But the more you started doing drugs and alcohol, the less weird I got.
Yeah. It's like a desensitizing process.
Yeah, it's a slow process.
They bring you in slow, this and that. You trust the guy, you get into some stuff, you see things, you get to go to games.
Oh, we got that. We got money, sneakers, clothes, got out of trouble.
Yeah.
They used to go to the schools and sign us out. And then we would go out and just get high and And, you know, everything was, you know, pretty much, it looked like, you know, if you were a kid and this is a fire, they definitely were pouring gasoline on a fire.
How long before things got sexual or went to like another level?
Well, that day in the pool, he was bumping and grinding on me. He didn't, you know, he grabbed my private parts a couple times, and, you know, he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're wrestling." Everything looked okay, but it didn't feel okay.
Yeah.
And I knew something was going on because this was unnatural for naked boys. If it was a girl, sure, but not two guys. I'm not gay. You know, and what happened, you know, it looked like he was bumping and grinding on me. And but I let it go, and then I said, well, I'm not going to go to these parties because I felt weird afterwards when I sobered up. But then everyone started going to Great Adventure and having these bicycles and, you know, gold chains and money in their pocket, and I wasn't. So he used other kids to coerce me and some of my friends. Come on, let's go back, and, you know, everything's cool, man. Nobody's got to know about it. And then it got into the touchy. And after a while, you said, well, F it. You know, I want these things. I want to go to Great Venture. Yeah. I want a new pair of sneakers. I want money in my pocket. So you start doing little things. And little things, the more you do it, the more dehumanized you get. And then that's where the drugs and alcohol increase. And then as you become more dehumanized, what was going on is you allowed them to do more and more things. And then at some point you wake up, you look in the mirror, and you realize you don't see yourself. You see yourself as some type of degenerate monster. And, you know, it's not the kid I'd hoped to be. It's the kid I became.
It's crazy the mental stuff behind that. You know, I never really thought about that, because you were saying like it's kind of your free will getting into this stuff. You know, you give a little bit of your humanity up to eventually for stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You know
It was a whole lot of things. And, you know, it was weird, and I definitely felt dehumanized. But I would say, because there's times where I walk away from saying doing that stuff no more.
What other kind of people were involved in this stuff in Philadelphia? You don't have to name names or anything like that, but just give us a scope of the type of people that would be at these parties. I'm sure.
Initially, the parties, it was just philanthropists and teachers and lawyers types. And then as it went on, the parties, they would take you to places in Manhattan. Atlantic City was just starting with the casinos. We did a lot in Resorts International. They used to have make us wait outside, and they would have the Union League, which is at Broad and Sampson.
I used to work at the Union League.
And
the Union League is like a very wealthy Republican private club, like old school, super big money.
Well, we weren't allowed in there, but we'd wait outside, and they'd take us to the movie theaters. Or on Chestnut Street was loaded with movie theaters, and Center City was arcades and stuff, buy us ice cream. And we'd wind up at 13th and Spruce, which was the Parker Hotel. It's still there today. We used to call that Pedophile Central, because even if you didn't find any of these guys and you wanted to hustle, and say I couldn't find Eddie Savitz or any of his friends, I would just stand out there, and eventually some dirty old man would come by, pick us up, and either going to we had rooms in there, and we'd take them inside the room, or we'd do something in their car. And then I'd flip a coin. Am I going to rob this guy or not rob him? Because a lot of times we would, you know, these guys have money. So what we do is we tell them, oh, come down this way, go down that way. And then when the guy went there, we robbed him. So, you know, not the best thing to do, but it was the thing to do in the mind when you're a 12-year-old kid, a 13-year-old kid, and you're on drugs and alcohol.
It's almost more humane to rob them than to fucking...
I thought so at the time.
So let's get into, there was like a bit of a pedophile ring. Like, so you're involved with Eddie in Philadelphia, and he's taking you to Atlantic City, he's taking you to New York, he's taking you to Penn State, he's taking you to D.C. When you go to Penn State, you meet Sandusky.
Eventually, yes.
And Savitz basically pimps you to Sandusky, correct?
Well, what it was is, we were going to Penn State games, and before I heard a lot about Coach Jerry. We didn't call him Sandusky. It was Coach Jerry this, Coach Jerry that. This guy used to bring kids down from, we used to call Jerry's kids, and it turned out the kids from the Second Mile Charity. And they would come to the Phillies games and the Eagles games and the Army-Navy games. And sometimes we would have events in Wildwood, New Jersey, this and that, Great Adventure. So they'd take them. So we always were combative with those kids. And what wound up happening was they would take you down to these things, and they kept talking about Coach Jerry. So in 1978, they take me to, I don't know at the time, I'm at a Penn State football game. I'm there to meet a guy named Scott. And I was living in New Jersey at the time, and living in Blackwood, New Jersey, and they said, look, we're going to go there and you can make a couple bucks, and he wants to do something with you. So I said, well, money's money. I need some drugs anyway. Let me go do this. And we drive up. Took a long time. It was probably about 2 hours, 3 hours past Harrisburg. We get down there. And we're at this game, and I'm already buzzed. They gave me some pills, prescription pills to kind of calm me down, because sometimes I'd be nervous, especially if it's a new guy and I don't know the guy, I don't know his intentions.
So Savitz would give you pills?
Savitz,
yes.
Eddie Savitz. Sometimes his friends would give us pills, but mainly he was the one. And I get down there and I meet a guy, and his name was Scott. It turned out to be Lawrence Scott Ward. He was just new to the area, and he wanted to be a professor with the University of Pennsylvania with Wharton School of Business. And so I met him, and there was a gentleman next to him, and I didn't know who he was. Looked like a football coach. That later on discovered to be Jerry Sandusky. I meet Scott Ward, and we go to the game. There was a little after party afterwards. Then we drive back down to a party, and this is in 1978 at the Parker Hotel at 13th and Spruce, because he lived in the off of City Line Ave. So came down there, and at some point we're at this party, and I'm getting more drugs, and I don't remember passing out, but I do remember waking up. And when I woke up, I had realized I was in a different room, naked, and that my rectum was bleeding. And at some point, he told me, and it hurt. And I had never done that. I'd done other things, but not that. But so there was, that's the first time I officially met Sandusky. Then later on, we went to other Penn State games, and then in 1979, we were prohibited from going to Penn State games because we always fist fought with those Jerry kids, the kids from the Second Mile Charity. So I wind up going to, they had fundraisers at the Second Mile Charity. When we get there, he's schmoozing because there's people there. It's a legitimate function, it's a fundraiser, but there's illegitimate people there too with their own agenda. So I sit back, it's me, Eddie Savitz, Sandusky, I believe Scott Ward was there. That news reporter, Bill Collin, he was the sports writer for the Daily News. Okay. He was there. Sam Rappaport was there, the real estate developer, and this guy called Coach Phil. And Coach Phil later on turns out to be Coach Phil Figlietta, and he was the football coach for a prep school in Brooklyn, New York called Poly Prep. But we were introduced as Coach Phil. So, well, anyway, Sandusky, Eddie Savitz we were supposed to do a thing called kid swapping, which is child sex trafficking. What happens is, if Sandusky came to Philly,
he'd bring some kids.
He'd bring kids, and they'd swap with the host and vice versa. So we go up there, Sandusky and Eddie Savitz introduced me to Coach Phil. And Coach Phil's willing, he lives in Brooklyn, New York. However, he's familiar with Philadelphia, and his cousin was into politics. So he follows us back to the Parker Hotel in '79, and he pays myself and this other kid $200 altogether. We got $100 each, and he went in there and we did sexual things with him. Then he made the mistake of falling asleep, and while he was asleep, we robbed him. Yeah. We stole his wallet, his watch. He had a gold watch, and we left him there. We figured we'd never see this guy. So when he left Philadelphia, he left empty-handed.
So I find it interesting that Eddie Savitz, a millionaire, very wealthy guy, him, kind of pandering children. There's like a weird thing with that, and you're talking about the child swapping. Do you think that that's part for their sexual enjoyment, that they get to swap kids, or, that there's like power plays being done with these kids, like they're using kids as commerce in some ways to get political gain, to get favors, to get tickets, to do, do you feel that there's any of that? There's definitely like blackmailing gets involved with that shit, when you get into like these pictures that get taken and these films that get taken, and I guess we'll get into that in a minute. But do you see that these guys are kind of working each other with this shit?
They definitely, what it was is, when we went to these different events, and whether it was Manhattan or Atlantic City, whoever the host of the event was, you know, the rule was, the thumb was, you bring some kids, and I'll let you play with my kids, you play with mine. Now, Eddie Savitz, he used to tell me, I was very tight with him between 1976 and 1980. And he used to say that because I used to think, like, how many penises can this guy suck and swallow? I mean, he would have kids, if it's 24 hours a day, this guy would give oral sex to kids 24 hours a day. And I used to think in the back of my mind, how much can he suck?
Well, now we see that shit's like a fucking addiction too.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like porn on the internet didn't exist back then, and how could people be addicted to sex and this and that?
Yeah.
But if you're really rich and you have fucking kids lining up at your fucking door all day, you can see that there's some insane obsession. And
Sure.
but
Eddie Savitz told me that what he was doing it because it was his fountain of youth. He thought by taking this, he was stealing our youth. Or
and he
energy.
is. He fucking is.
In a way,
He took your youth.
ironically,
He fucking took your youth. You know, there's no doubt about that.
Sure.
And that gets into like shit I want to get into later when there's like weird satanic shit with this type of stuff. But metaphorically speaking, he is taking power from you, and he
sure.
is taking fucking, you know, and there is all that shit in with that stuff. So continue, please. I'm sorry.
Ironically, it's that youth that wind up killing them in the end. But, you know.
You could say karma.
Well, yeah. And I used to say urinating in the wind, but same thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, so, you know, he would take us out to these places, and that's how I met Sandusky. And first time, unofficially, I met him in 1978. Officially, I met him, and when I was introduced, this is Coach Jerry. He never used the word. Mm-hmm. Everything was Coach or this one or that one. He didn't use last names. Later on, it's discovered Coach Jerry is Jerry Sandusky.
Yeah. So was there engagement with you and Sandusky
well, at that
directly?
1979 incident, what he had done is I went there. I was coerced, and they called me on the phone. I was living in Blackwood, New Jersey, and they said they called my home phone, and Eddie Savitz was my mentor. Uh-huh. So my mom tells me, "Oh, you know, you got Mr. Savitz on the phone." So I get on the phone, and I knew he wanted me to do something, or to go find some kids for him or something. So when I go there, there's another guy talking softly in the background. I don't know who it is. That later is introduced as Coach Jerry. And they want to come up and they want to meet me. He's heard a lot about me. And so when I get down to this event, I'm introduced to him. At first, I'm fooled by him because his demeanor is not of a degenerate child molester, but it looks like a legitimate guy. But as the time goes on, and he had a couple drinks, and we're in the back, in the far corner, and you know, it becomes more touchy. Then Eddie Savitz brings out, he always had these Polaroid films or instamatic films of kids in different positions with their naked. Mm-hmm. And so they're showing, they're passing around like baseball cards. And they're looking at, you know, because he wants to see what he's getting. So, you know, he's looking, then he's kind of touching me, talking in a soft way, how he wants to come back and give me a massage and do this. But he's touching me, but he's groping me. Now he's feeling on my thigh. He doesn't grab my private parts, but what he's doing is massaging me, massaging my stomach, massaging my back, my shoulders, and he's going up my thigh, and with his outer part of his thumb, he's kind of finding, kind of seeing where my private parts, my leg ends and my private part begins. Mm-hmm. And at first I didn't think much of it. Later on, as I discovered, that's sexual groping and the coercing and then sharing of nude child pornography. Mm-hmm. So that's what he did that time. And then when it looked like he didn't want to meet at the allowed time, Jerry Sandusky and Eddie Savitz, then introduced me to one of their friends and passed me on with the understanding that I'm going to go with this guy, and whatever I was going to do with Sandusky, go do it with this guy. Then Sandusky would get a rain check for me, and I would get so much, you know, between me and the other kid, we get $100 each, 200 all together, and in return for sexual acts.
So it was never really you never really went all the way or did anything sexual with Sandusky
besides
the groping, but it was obvious, but you knew what was going on with him. And he was definitely connected to Savitz as far as swapping kids with each other, and you were present to that type of behavior. Well, that's why
when people initially, Sandusky case broke, I initially didn't think I was a victim.
Because he was pandering kids, and that shit got really squashed away. Like, what really came down with Sandusky was that, you know, he was molesting kids, and that's, to me, when you get into this fucking trafficking of children over state lines and this and that, and that's some heavy shit. And this whole like swapping Jerry's kids with Eddie's kids, you know, and what's also fucking equally insane and bizarre is that a lot of these pedophilia organizations are linked to at-risk youth kids, because when you look at Covenant House in New York.
I knew that individual.
And you knew that guy, Father Ritter?
Yeah, Bruce Ritter.
And then, you know, we'll get into this in a little bit, but there was the crazy story of Boys Town in Nebraska and Lawrence King, which was a pedophile ring that went over states, which also connects to Sandusky and you.
Well, he connects more with Eddie Savitz than he does connect.
Yes, I'm sorry about that.
Sandusky.
But you met Lawrence King at some point, and we'll get into that in a second. But this network of, like, you know, well, for one, at-risk kids, they're easy to get. You know what I mean? You're troubled, we're gonna help you. You know, give us your kids, we're gonna help them, and we're gonna fuck them, and we're gonna steal their power.
Well, they didn't say all that.
But that's it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you've seen it, and you saw it firsthand. So let's get into it. So like some time passes by, and eventually you go to some parties in D.C. And let's get into Lawrence King, since I just kind of brought him up.
Well,
and for maybe the people that don't know, if you want to explain who Lawrence King is.
Lawrence King is he was the head of the Black Republican Caucus.
He was a huge Republican celebrity at the time too, like real up and comer.
He reminded me of Al Sharpton back in Al Sharpton's. He had this pimp hairdo. Where he was kind of like, you know, this swagger, street smart guy.
Interesting, the Republican connection too, like you waiting out front of the Union League, which is a private Republican club, and then we have, you know, not trashing all Republicans.
Well, I'm a Republican myself.
Republicans. Well, because you're fucked up because of what they did to you. It's the only reason.